It's no surprise that the radical elites in our government are accumulating power at an alarming rate. Many argue that this threatens our constitutional rights.
America is facing a crisis. We have freedom at risk in a country that's had it for 240 years.
I've never seen anything like the attack on our Constitution. Our First Amendment rights are under attack, and we know that the First Amendment protects freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and this freedom of religion that's being attacked the most is being directed at Christians as opposed to people of other religions.
Christian people are starting to wake up to the threat. Pastors have a very important role as our shepherds, and the shepherds lead the sheep toward safe pasture. And where the left is leading us now is anything but safe pastures.
What we see taking place today is an erosion of all American rights, in particular, an attack on Christianity.
There is an onslaught of attacks on our freedoms coming in the form of legislation through the Congress.
In some of the radical pieces of legislation being proposed out there, even impose penalties upon places of worship that don't share their radical view of the world. And that's just wrong. That's not what the Constitution guarantees. And we need to be able to fight, not just in the court of public opinion, but in the court of law if need be. That's one of our key elements that comes out of the long game, is invoking the Constitution, whether it's on this issue or on free speech or anything else that's guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution.
We're seeing one-party government. Now that the Democrats have power in both branches of the elected federal government and the White House, they're trying to shove through two powerful bills that would, I think, finish off freedom in America. They're that dangerous. One is the For the People Act, which would wipe away election safeguards, including voter ID laws. It would federalize elections. The other is the Equality Act, which would criminalize Christianity. It basically elevates sexual rights above all other rights, even those that are explicit in the U.S. Constitution, like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion.
These pieces of legislation, while masquerading as promoting equality and fairness, essentially censor Christian and conservative speech.
What we see in our culture and even the censorship we see, these things didn't just happen in the last few days or the last few years even. They've gone back about a decade, and in many cases, decades even before that.
Americans are losing their right to freedom of speech. Those rights are being threatened at a rate that I've never seen before. It first started on university campuses with speech codes.
For many, many years, there were liberal biased and liberal professors on our college campuses, but you could still have a dialogue. In the 90s and early 2000s, we got into political correctness, and today we see outright cancel culture.
This canceling of speech further extends its arm into the mainstream through the rise of social media.
Now we have big tech, Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of these leftist agencies, very progressive, that are monitoring American speech and deciding, what is mean and what isn't. And what they're doing is targeting conservatives, and it impacts Christians in a way that it doesn't necessarily impact other Americans.
Well, essentially, these big tech companies are holding themselves out as being the new virtual public square. They are now acting in many ways as kind of the ticket takers as to who can come in. If you got a liberal ticket, come on in. You got a conservative ticket, not so sure. Let's see what you've got to say. That's not free speech, and when speech is no longer free, that's a problem for all of society, and people need to realize that.
There's no question that on YouTube, the social issues are the hot button. Everything from race to abortion to same-sex marriage to transgenderism. If you violate the left's standards of political correctness here, then there's a good shot they're going to demonetize you. They'll find that you run afoul of their community standards.
Thus spawned the phenomenon commonly referred to as cancel culture.
With cancel culture, what they have done is pretty much try to marginalize, deplatform, dethrone, silence anyone with whom they disagree. People may find themselves canceled. We have this cancel culture, and they can be canceled over just innocent things, routine things. Christians who advocate traditional marriage, pro-life positions, that's seen as hate speech, and people may lose their jobs.
While our religious freedoms are at risk here in America, in England, pastors preaching biblical truths are labeled as terrorists.
I never ever thought that giving a sermon would lead to me being dismissed and reported for prevent and safeguarding and treated in such a way.
Reverend Bernard Randall, a school chaplain, was reported to the government's terrorist watchdog and forced out of his job simply for preaching a sermon on identity politics.
But if the world is mad enough to say that a Church of England minister talking about the Church of England's beliefs is an extremist, a violent extremist, if it's mad enough to say that in the first place, someone else might be mad enough to act on it.
The political left, they talk about wokeness, that they are woke. This could not be further from the truth. These are dangerous, deceived individuals who have no connection to reality. In fact, they would argue that there's no true reality, that you get to make up your own.
Another disturbing tactic used by the radical left to eliminate our basic freedoms predominantly occurs with the threat of a crisis.
I think that the whole COVID pandemic has had a huge impact two ways. One, it has allowed people in government to abuse their power, shut down churches, and treat them differently from other institutions. That grates on a lot of people. And then they realize, hey, the government under liberal leadership does have an agenda against the church. The other thing is that people can see the ways government can use a crisis to its advantage and have to be more alert than ever.
That agenda is definitely one that is not one where the people maintain their rights. It's one where there's a concentrating of power, and most people will give up their freedoms to the government if they feel threatened and if there's a panic. And so there's a whole strategy built around intentionally creating or capitalizing on a crisis in order to concentrate control. Emmanuel, who was involved with the Obama campaign, he said, never let a good crisis go to waste. It's an opportunity to push your agenda, which in their case is a big government agenda. So you have a crisis that can be fanned and increased and spread, and when the people have fear and they panic and they feel insecurity for life and property, they want answers and they want solutions. They want it now. And when somebody comes along and says, I can solve it, I just need some emergency powers for the government.
With the government continually overreaching and attempting to take away our freedoms, it is clear that there's an anti-American spirit afoot in our culture today.
We have reached a point where the government has become so intrusive, and it's intrusive in such a way that it wants to dictate, what Americans can do and what they can say and what is hate and what isn't. The government is intruding into areas where it has no business. It wants to take over everything. At the end of the day, it's about taking down America. It's not about improving the lives of racial and ethnic minorities. It's not about really making everyone equal. It's about taking down America.